But first, joining me now to discuss the day's headlines is Deputy Executive Director for the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. Dan, a fascinating development this week. ASIC is suing McQuary for allegedly misreporting on short selling over a period of 14 years. Now, what are the nature of the allegations and why is that happening now?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things. It's I think ASIC has been pursuing McQuary for some time now that they weren't correctly or they were underreporting their short selling. So this can have implications for the broader market, and what ASIC is saying is it can impact the confidence of the market. What I think it's really interesting here is that it's an example of what happens, whether it's McQuary or whether it's other big businesses and banks in Australia, when you take your eye off the ball. Many of these organisations spend all of their time moralising to Australians about, diversity, equity and inclusion, or ESG mandates and quotas and climate change, and, refusing to lend to farmers because of climate change and other considerations. Well, this is what happens when you take your eye off the ball and when you ignore your key business and key considerations, in this case as a financial institutions. And I think a lot of Australians look at this and say, well, just get back to basics, focus on your core business, rather than engaging in woke moralising that I suspect is a part of the reason why they've taken their eye off the ball.
Yeah, it does appear to be that. And look, that'll be very, very interesting once those proceedings progress and we start to see a bit more meat on those bones. Now, Tim Gurner, he's not backwards in saying his piece. He has been very controversial before, but this week he said that he foresees a 15-year rental crisis ahead. So, Dan, firstly, why is it that long, and what does he suggest is the cause?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here, Caroline. I mean, the number one cause that we have in this country is this massive unplanned migration intake that's been taking place since COVID. It has not been planned for, it hasn't had the consent of the community, and it also hasn't been targeted towards areas of economic need. So, we have a housing crisis because we've had this massive surge of demand coming from this massive migrant intake. Now, I'm not blaming the migrants themselves, because of course you'd want to come to our great country and have a better future. But,
right.
It's the fault of governments for having this massive demand without the supply coming online. And it's not just housing. All you have to do is look at the roads, the social services, how long it takes to get into a GP appointment, local schools. Often in many of these developments, there's no local public school in place. So, these are massive issues. And yes, at the same time, we have a supply side issue when you look at the taxes, the red tape, all of the cost imposts upon developers when they actually do want to set up a new development. So, look, the number one thing governments must do immediately is to cut out immigration intake to ease the pressure on the housing market.
Absolutely. And if you are going to bring people in, please bring in tradies, because we definitely need a few more of those. And it'd also be helpful, I suppose, if a few less building companies went under. But, another one of those woes, I suppose, for business, but also for the household, is the cost of energy. And probably the least surprising piece of news this week is that New South Wales is the second most expensive state to run household appliances. And guess what, Dan? The cost is going to continue to go up. So this is obviously going to be unsurprising to anyone with half a clue. But how can these governments continue to fail on energy policy when the reality is clear for all of us to see?
Well, exactly. This has been a long time coming. We've been warning about the consequences of net zero for a very long time. And it's, this is net zero in action. It's how it impacts the day-to-day lives of Australians, not just through energy bills, not just through the increased risk of blackouts, but through the things that we do every single day. And, unfortunately, this is going to continue until we remove net zero and until we remove emissions as a centrepiece of our energy policy. I mean, energy policy should be focused on one thing, and that is cutting costs, reducing prices to ease the burden on households, to ease the burden on businesses, and make sure we can actually have a manufacturing and heavy industry sector again. So, look, unfortunately, Australians are going to keep feeling the pain while these inner city activists push the net zero agenda upon us.
And despite, all of that, and still on this topic, this sector, this energy sector, has vacuumed up all manner of government grants and subsidies over the last few years. And for example, now questions are being asked about FMG's closed Gladstone plant. Well, what's the story here, and how do those subsidies and grants impact the broader industry?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, green hydrogen has basically been shown to be a hoax and a bit of a fraud being perpetuated on the Australian people, and in particular on those who are at risk of losing their jobs in traditional industries. They were told, oh, well, you're going to get new jobs in green hydrogen. Well, I mean, that's just not happening. So, and the other point is this is used, green hydrogen has been used as a bit of a front to fleece taxpayers of subsidies. And you've got these sort of, subsidy hunters that go around and they set up these projects and get subsidies and then don't go ahead with the projects, or the projects shut down. And I think it's a real issue. I think the subsidies should be paid back where a project does not go ahead. And we also need to get real about this fact that green hydrogen is not the future, at least not at the moment. I'm all in favour of exploring new technologies, but at the end of the day, we need baseload power supply that actually exists right now. And what we have is coal and gas. That's how you keep the lights on and get prices down and keep regional communities ticking over.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on to education and a fascinating piece in The Age where Frank Hardy, and he's the chair of Victoria's Independent Office of School Dispute Resolution, has suggested that parents should face a $1,000 fine for defaming teachers or principals online. Now, Daniel, I'm sure there is a problem there of some sort, but is that really the solution?
Well, sadly, maybe it is. I mean, I haven't come across this before, but reading the article, it's something that's not common, but it does happen. And look, I think that a school has every right to protect its teachers and its principal. I mean, I was actually a candidate for the Liberal Party in the election, a recent federal election, and one of the things I did was meet with schools and school principals, and I was shocked to learn that one of the highest burnout rates and one of the highest levels of actually post-traumatic stress is among principals. So I don't doubt that there's a real problem here. And it's not just this particular issue, but the range of other issues that principals and school staff have to deal with. So, I mean, if you've got parents that are defaming or abusing teachers or principals or support staff, then I think there needs to be consequences. And it's just, I think, another example of what an absolute mess our education system has become, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it appears to me that there's all these other underlying issues, and I just feel like, yes, this is something that needs to be dealt with, but there's probably also those deeper issues that need to be dealt. I think this is symptomatic of something else, essentially. Now, on to the UK, and here is British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and a stunning about-face on immigration policy.
So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo. You're actually contributing to the forces that are slowly pulling our country apart. So yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce immigration significantly.
Dan, is this a come-to-Jesus moment for Starmer, or has he simply been mugged by political reality?
Well, I really think this is a landmark speech. I think this will have far-reaching consequences in the UK and around the Western world. This is the speech that we need to hear here in Australia, and our political leaders haven't been up to the job. I'm surprised to hear it from Keir Starmer. I didn't expect him to do this, but he has. And I think this is incredibly important. Clearly, he's under electoral pressure from Nigel Farage. This speech would not have been given without Nigel Farage and his Reform Party having made significant inroads at the recent council elections. And he can quite clearly see the writing on the wall that a significant majority of mainstream British society are fed up with the immigration program. It was also a list of substantive proposals that he's put forward. He has now also created a rod for his back. He's going to have to deliver very significant reductions to the immigration intake into the UK. But a lot of what Keir Starmer said, sadly, particularly when he talked about an island of strangers, that applies to Australia as well. And I hope the government here is paying attention because we need action on this issue.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Dan, back here in Australia, and new data is showing that wages grew over the March quarter and they are above the inflation rate annually. Now, Michelle Bullock at the Reserve Bank, she has still suggested caution. What is the basis of that caution? What's the issue that remains? And is it, or is it it's not as simple, I suppose, as the economy just recovering?
Well, I think there's a couple of issues. One is we don't have much productivity growth. And so if the supply of your economy isn't increasing and wages are going up and you're pumping more money into the economy, that can fuel inflation. So there's a concern there. And basically, the reason why we care about the supply side of the economy is it really reflects the capacity of your economy to generate wealth. And so if that's not growing, then the fundamentals of the economy are not improving. So it's obviously great news that real wages are going up. But what we need to see is for that to be sustainable. And I think that's partly why Jim Chalmers has pointed to productivity as being an aim of his. Now, whether they follow through or not, I don't know. But they're on the right path if they are genuinely going to do something about it.
Yeah, indeed.